Everyone's in frame. Everyone's good. Team web. Take a little bit closer.
Yeah, we're all ready for
Sorry. Zachariah.
Zach and Bill, real quick one.
Hey.
And then we'll get Zach and Bill. Thank
I have
you.
one of those.
You guys become best friends.
Yeah.
I love it. You guys are great.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, now you
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. That's a good photo. It's already yeah.
You know, they took that picture when I was the mayor of Fort Worth.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I was like.
Yeah. I'm gonna send you a message right now. Just to connect. So.
Yeah, oh, yeah. So when did you start Jeb off? Can we be in it? Can we be in it? Right?
Good to go.
So you're doing, hold on. Are you coming down? Or is it full?
I got more. Stop.
You're gonna agree with it.
I'm surrounded when I was younger.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. There's so much that.
We had a community group you're asking about. We're gonna get ready.
Start up. You wait.
My full-time job I work for.
Oh.
I'm passionate about that.
How come you guys all took a picture together?
Oh, we all work together. We're all
Really?
working.
Yeah,
Team web.
Yeah, so we work with Bill. Bill is our.
Mr. Quantum and the friends.
Team Quantum.
Why are you on the ground?
So I use all the libraries like.
Oh.
Yeah.
You know, I've always thought, man, if I went somewhere, I'm gonna bring a whole line of girls and put them in the back.
Yeah. But everyone's really like, oh, Michael and the girls around. Right? I said, no, but best power, the sentiment is, I was saying, I was like, this is a place to be for a girl. Like, why are we the only girls here? This is right.
It's Quantum, right?
I know, so when you see me popping up to y'all's events, right? I love AI. I love content.
So there's like a.
I believe so.
Thank you. Yeah, that's easy. You're not. Oh, you're not. That's cute.
Awesome. I want to kick this off. I'll just get food. So make sure you get some food. We're ready to get started if y'all are.
What?
Yeah, just like.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Well, welcome in. This is ACM San Antonio. We are the Association for Computing and Machinery, and it is our first event of the year. If you're curious, when we host events, we host them every even month. So February being number 2, you'll expect our next one on. So excited to have you all here. Excited for Bill and the Webhead team here to support us and be the first speakers of the year with ACM San Antonio. And if you're curious more about what we are, ACM San Antonio is a professionally chartered organization of a national organization that spans from the United States, Central Asia, all over the place. So it's super cool, and I like being a part of it. I was a part of it while I was a student at UTSA. So it really just speaks home to me. And like we were working so much on our mission, so we wrote that our goal is to assist in the cultivating a thriving and professional community for engineers, scholars, and those looking to learn to connect, collaborate, and elevate San Antonio's tech ecosystem. So with that being said, I'm Zachariah Holland. I'm a recent grad from UTSA. I am the chair for the organization, exactly. My co-chair back here helped me run the show is Gene. And our door guard, he's outside, is Mark Robinson. He's our treasurer. So small board, small team, but we're looking to put more events on together and do a bunch of other stuff. So we're excited for the year. One of the big things that we wanted to announce this year, and along with upcoming events, is supporting the organization itself. What we're going to announce real quick after that is also to thank you for the support for the pizza from Webhead. So all the food you're eating, please eat it all. I cannot take it home. I did buy a lot of pizza, so thank you. And the big thing I want to announce is our ACM San Antonio membership. It is simply put something that came from while I was a student at UTSA to help fund the org, help buy pizza, help rent rooms, help the org operate for a full year, right? And so the number that I'm going to tell you is a number that we've thought through things that we've paid for memberships, paid for our services to reach out and or be a part of the community, is all going to go to support that effort, right? I do this as a volunteer. We do this as a volunteer. We are full-time engineers outside of this, so that's why we ask. You're wondering maybe what a membership entails. We've defined two things: and associate members and full members. Associate members are actively attending events, engaging in the community, and we'll make a sign up coming soon so that you can actively or show that you're an active member. The easiest way to do that now is just straight up through meetup.com, where we mainly post most of our events right now. So if you're looking for up-to-date stuff about ACM San Antonio, events upcoming, and to plug a little bit, Dev San Antonio and their board member here, Jesse, sorry to call you out right there in the middle.
Yes.
But if you're looking to support, be a part of the community, that's the community where I'm going to push y'all through. So we're all one. There's no reason to be different, but excited to be there. So full members, everything an associate member does and gets, whatever it might be now or coming in the future, but you also pay the yearly dues. The yearly dues will be announced in a second, but why be a full member, right? The full member not only supports the org like I was telling you, but also you get access to the ACM National Full Network, the national chapter that I just described to y'all. You get access to their scholarly work. You get access to things like Pluralsight as a full member. You get access to teachings and trainings. And if there's any other things that you're looking for interest, or maybe you've heard about it before, or maybe you're already an ACM National member that you pay for that, you can be a member through us at a discounted rate. So that's all I'm going to plug for that. If that's something that's interested in you, totally let us know. But there's our support. We also take donations as a 501c3, and I'll leave it off there. I'll leave it there for a second. I'll show all this stuff at the end of the thing too, so no sweat. And don't forget to follow us. I did mention that we have a big community. Luma is another meetup platform essentially, and that Discord link does take you to our Dev San Antonio Discord. So I encourage you to be a part of there. If you're looking for other events, if you're looking for our event, those are the places that you can definitely find everything else at. But without further ado, let's jump into it for what y'all here for, right? Quantum computing with Bill Gonzalez.
So I didn't really prepare a PowerPoint theme for this, so it's going to look fairly straightforward. But I'm really just trying to convey to you and expose you to some of what quantum computing has in store for some, maybe all of you. And so I'll do this presentation based on a couple of different topics, and then so it's just basically a primer just on what we're doing next. So little old me, I'll just talk a little bit about it. I've been doing research in this arena for the past 5 years or so. I actually work full-time for a company, an IT company, Webhead. It's recently celebrated 30 years. I've got certificates from MIT's X-Pro program. Essentially what they do is you pay them a certain amount of money and, they kind of go through a course, but they actually cover a lot of interesting things, and you get to hear talks by a lot of very interesting people. For example, Peter Shore, which came up with the algorithm that many people have touted to be able to break current RSA encryption. So you hear some presentations from him, and he talks about how he came up with the algorithm and what kind of things it can be used for. So aside from that, some of us are on limited budget. So then you say, okay, well, that was a good amount of money spent for a certificate that I can hang on my wall. There's an organization called QWorld. So they have organizations all across the world. They're out of Latvia, the University of Latvia. So I took up with them. They offer their courses free. You can basically sign up. They've got some introductory courses where you basically log on. They're called bronze and silver, I believe, and there's another one called gold. But essentially, you can do your self-paced learning, essentially a collection of Python scripts with some reading material. But if you get past all that, they also have some courses that you can take that span, anywhere from 6 months to a year. And normally what happens is you get with a group of people, it's all done online, and you present a project at the end. So you either do it by yourself or you get with a few people and you pick a topic, or they'll give you some topics to choose in quantum information science. You work towards a presentation and a paper. It's not going to get published unless, of course, you submit it. But the idea there is for you to sort of self-pace. You get to meet some very interesting people. They'll bring in lots of people that are currently operating in the quantum information community. So it's really cool. I've worked on some interesting stuff through this. I'm also a member of IEEE Quantum and Consumer Technology. And then I go to a lot of conferences, but enough about me. I also advise a few companies. They're in this arena, and basically because I have a business background, I can give them advice on, what kind of things how to handle certain things that they might come up with. But because of my computer science background, I can also, assist with that. So a lot of times I'm involved in meetings or called into meetings, maybe sometimes to be a fly on the wall, maybe sometimes to represent that organization from a technical standpoint. It all depends. But it's kind of interesting stuff. Surprisingly, a lot of these organizations are not in the US. There's many that are startups that are, say, out of India, for example. But they vary. They're doing some really interesting things, and it's kind of cool. I'm always working in the defense industry, and I'm always telling them, hey, there's a lot of things going on that we're not capturing, we're not taking advantage of, and I'm hoping that there'll be more things that happen in that realm. So some presentation rules. You'll notice I'll say and allows it, don't judge me. We're gonna run fast. I'm just gonna try to keep going. I speak fast most of the time. We'll ask questions at the end unless it's something super important, like you gotta go use the restroom or something. I don't know. I don't know everything about quantum, neither do you. So just sit here with me and learn. I'm learning as I go. Don't ask me any smart questions because I may not know them. Educate thyself, seek to discover. So most of what I've done is self-taught, right? So that's normally how it starts out, and then you get into possibly going with something like QWorld or through IBM. The University of Chicago also has a quantum course. Of course, you're talking about $2,500 for 6 months, but you get to meet people in that ecosystem. And Chicago is big right now. I mean, they've got a big campus going on the south side of Chicago. They've got a large, I believe it's Quantum, who's setting up a big campus. And so you're going to see a lot of people come in to that area. So if you're interested in the future of, finding a job, that might be the place to go. Don't blame me for any loss of time if you go down a rabbit hole, because that happens all the time. And, I'm sure I'll admit myself that, this morning I was looking into, things like, space-time manifolds and twistor theory and all these other weird things that kind of take me by the wayside. I don't have the answer for everything. There's nothing mystical going on here. There's no, episode of Devs or whatever. You'll be surprised sometimes when I go to some of these conferences, you'll have people who try to sell you some quantum crystals or some other strange thing, but it happens. And you have to, separate the wheat from the chaff. So today's goal is basically exposure, right, to quantum information. Part of the reason is fear of missing out. A lot of people are working day to day and they hear so much about quantum. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. I don't know. So the idea there is, you don't want to miss some of what's going on because there's a lot of stuff going on underneath. So you see the currents above, there's many more currents underneath, and there's a lot of things that are going on, a lot of opportunity. The basic idea is how do we leverage quantum effects in computation, right? So we don't understand everything, but we see the effects and we want to harness them for some effect. So there'll be some topics like quantum, quantum today, the state of quantum today, quantum physics, modalities, quantum computing, quantum machine learning, education, clusters, and workforce. I may not be able to cover them all, but I'll do my best. So you hear a lot if you're interested in quantum about what's called the quantum winter, just like anything else. API winter was something at one point, but mainly the reason you hear that is because there's big corporations promising lots of things and saying they have it now, but they don't. These are basically marketing agendas that they're trying to say, hey, we've already got some practical use. And so what happens is people lose faith, right? I mean, they're saying, hey, well, you said we were going to be able to do this, and okay, it's 5 years, 10 years, 30 years later. So then something else catches their eye and they move away from it. But if you look at things like Interquantum, which is one of the newsletters I get daily, you'll see people working actively on, here you see autonomous agricultural vehicles optimized using hybrid quantum resistant data transmission, drug discovery. There's money at 2.5 billion proposed to the Senate. That's the DOE has a lot of money in this arena. I've talked to a few people there, and they're highly interested. But again, it's hard to plead your case when you're still working on a solution that may or may not have viability, until 5 or 10 years out. And there's organizations that are trying to group all these quantum cloud platforms that are available. So most of the time, if you're working on a quantum program, you're going to be working on simulators, which means that normally you can work locally and you can get to some degree of usefulness, but at some point, you have to move outside of an actual simulator and you move over to a cloud-based framework, which is IBM, IonQ, and a whole bunch of them. Amazon has a big collection of them. Rigetti is another one. Some of them offer you access free, others don't. Some, like IBM, which I do a lot of work with, they'll offer you their lower level 56 qubit machines for free. But if you want to use their higher end machines, then either you go through research, as a educational institution, or you pay. And I've talked to a few of the people that do deal with this kind of stuff. Oh, I lost one now. Sorry about that. Yep, no problem.
Let's go, Gene.
Mr. Barton.
Mr. Barton?
Okay. Go where? I'm sorry? That way? What do you do? Which way? This way? Okay.
Oh,
Okay, we're
yeah.
good. Sorry about that, guys.
So we're back online. Okay, so anyway, that's the idea there, is that even though you might get persuaded and say, you know what, I don't want to pursue this yet. A lot of business people don't. People don't invest in quantum. You had, the guy from NVIDIA say a few things, and all the quantum stocks went down. People lost lots of money there. But the idea there is you don't understand that he's probably himself working on something in the background. I mean, maybe you might even understand that. So the quantum sentiment, you probably heard of it, but what are those rewards? How's it going to work? Quantum computing is closer than ever, but everybody's too busy with AI to pay attention. I mean, you probably get 10 times more articles on AI come across your screen than you do about quantum, unless you're specifically interested in quantum. So what are some of the high points, or what are some of the pieces that quantum work? So you got qubits instead of bits. A lot of you, if you've done at least some initial research, you'll understand that. The problem is they're unstable. So that's part of the issue that some of these hardware companies are trying to work through, is that some of them are keeping them cold, in cryogenic refrigerators like IBM, superconducting qubits. But even then, it's hard to get information in and out of those systems. And so that's part of the problem they're trying to deal with. Although there are some qubits that do not require that type of cold, or maybe not as cold. There's also some room temperature type qubits. And essentially what these are systems that can represent a qubit or a quantum state in some physical form. And there's many different types. They're called modalities. So U.S. governments and governments abroad are spending big money on these types of systems. DARPA, for example, has put out a QBI, quantum benchmarking initiative, that says, okay, everybody in the U.S. or everybody, stop telling us your computer can do this. Show us by 2027. That's what we want to see. And so they put basically a line in the sand and said, put up or shut up. And so there's many companies that were involved. They picked a few, Microsoft being one of them, which is kind of interesting to me. But they're teaming up with another partner. But the idea there is the U.S. government is saying, look, we don't want to just be putting money out to all these startups. We want to know someone who's really going to produce an actual quantum computer for us. IBM being one, Honeywell started off as Honeywell Quantum, but now they're called Quantinuum. I was at a press conference where they announced the name and nobody could pronounce it. I mean, it's kind of strange. Then there's smaller players, and by small, we mean smaller than these big companies, but D-Wave, Rigetti, IonQ. And then there's a lot of small players on the software side. So these are the hardware people that are building the machines, the computers, the cloud services, but you need a way to program those computers. And so that's basically the software side. So if you're a developer, you understand you've got tools, right? You've got your dev tools, you've got your Visual Studio Code or whatever it is that you're using. That's where a lot of the startups are coming in. And so you'll see a lot of the small companies doing that. The other thing is control. So you have a lot of companies who are very good at controlling mechanisms, lasers, electromagnetic fields. They're the ones that are helping the hardware companies control these qubits. So they're also making some money, and some of them are small, some of them are large. Photonics is a big thing. There's a lot of companies who were working on other things that were related to photonics. And then, by the way, they said, you know what, we could also use this on the quantum side. So they're also able to step over and start using some of their technologies to control or to help make some of these quantum computers. And as mentioned, practicality is still very far off, but some companies are more optimistic. I've been to many conferences on the quantum side, and the way these companies talk, you think they already had one. They were already doing something great. Some are doing great things, believe me, but practicality is not there yet. In other words, something that can be said, this can now outperform a classical computer overall, universally, and in a manner that now somebody could start using that to solve real world problems. And there's an arms race underway. China is the other big organization, or the country, and the U.S. are basically head to head. And there's a lot of information flow between, but the government is now even asking companies like myself to, hey, be a little more careful. IBM, for example, now requires citizenship to use their system. So you're going to see a lot more things like that. And it's sometimes a good thing and a bad thing, but of course, this is just the way of the world now. So some initial forays into quantum tech, what things are being done now, quantum random number generators. So essentially, if anyone knows anything about computers, they don't truly produce true random numbers. But in the quantum world, you can. So there's organizations that already produce devices that can do this, and some of them are handheld. But essentially, what they're mainly used for is the next line item here, QKD, quantum key distribution. There's not very big uses of this, but this essentially is the same thing as standard key distribution. So if you work, for example, in a secure environment, you have to get tokens issued, pushed back, and they get refreshed every now and then. And this is to keep everything secure, everything under wraps. Well, part of the QKD one of the things you need is some random number generation to regenerate all these tokens that are getting passed around. Communication going across the internet as well. So you'll have QRNG usually paired up with QKD. There's also quantum networking. One of the first protocols I was interested in was BB84. So I went to a few sessions and talked about, people basically developing just like standard internet protocols. They're developing some that are specific for the quantum realm. The issue with some of that is you can only go so far. And there's one issue with quantum signals is that you cannot copy them. There's a no cloning theory, which means that if you could only go so far and you needed a repeater in normal terms, like in the regular networking world, you have a repeater that basically amplifies your signal and sends it back in again. You can't do that on the quantum side. If you did do that, you basically are decoding your message, taking it out of the quantum state, and then pushing it back through. Well, that becomes a weak point. Somebody could effectively hack into that right at the repeater point, and then what do you have? You have an insecure network, or you have at least an attack vector that someone can exploit. Quantum sensing. So the government is really interested in this. Whenever I've talked to people, the AFRL, a lot of times they say, well, what can you do for me on the sensor side? And the reason is because they're looking for GPS denied environment solutions. Everybody is, the defense sector knows that GPS can be spoofed. And so you're talking about ships coming into port and all of a sudden not receiving the right signals, and they could either crash or, cause some damage, cost lives. And so what they're looking for is something that can be packaged and placed on a ship or a plane or a vehicle. They can still allow that vehicle to navigate securely without having to hit a satellite, up in the sky. So that's basically where you'll see some of that current technology. And this is actually in use right now. They have organizations that are already doing these things. Again, that's not on the computation side. So here's some quantum areas, technology pillars. Some of them may fold into what many of you may be doing now, but you've got quantum computation and simulation. I'll talk a little bit about annealers and simulators. Then you've got quantum computers. These are all the modalities that you actually have in there. I'll talk a little bit more about that. Communication and networking. You've got post-quantum cryptography. Well, so that's the thing that people are trying to develop to prevent people using Shor's algorithm, which is essentially a period finding algorithm or factory, from breaking RSA encryption. Now, it's not as easy as people make it. Oh, quantum computers are going to break all our encryption. So people, organizations, NIST has already selected 4 cryptographic algorithms that are hopefully going to protect against those types of threats. Now, nobody really knows whether they will or not, but the hope is there, right? So they're using mathematics like elliptical curve and a bunch of other things. I mentioned quantum random number generators, key distribution, quantum networks. There's a sensing here. I mentioned physical pressure, magnetic fields, electric fields. Timing is another important thing. You can get very accurate timing. So that's very important when you're passing messages back and forth. And with the amount of data that most systems now are passing across, I mean, it's important. You have to make sure they're timed correctly. Otherwise, you get some other issues. And then there's the inertia, like gyroscope, accelerometer, and gravimeter. Quantum optics. There's people doing research there. Quantum biology. So I was at a presentation where you had some people who were using cells to actually do some simple addition. Interesting stuff. But they're using the quantum properties of what's going on in order to try to solve some problems. And then on the photonic side, of course, there's some companies that I know that only invest in photonics. They feel that's going to be the way to go, which is interesting. And so they only invest in, they ask you want us to invest in you? Do you have photonics anywhere in your system? And if you say no, they said, you pass. But they're still trying to solve some problems. Single photon generation, of course, is one of the big things. And that's basically sending a photon at a time out to a signal to split that photon in order to get entangled states. And that's between two qubits. Quantum cybersecurity. I mean, I know in San Antonio, we've got a lot of cybersecurity experts. So there's sort of some of the same things you'll see. QRNG for generating secure keys, QKD, breaking RSAs, I mentioned, which is basically one of the first algorithms that were developed that would show, in theory, that a quantum computer could do something that a classical computer could not. And so that was sort of something that Peter Shor came up with, and that's sort of what spawned a lot of all this activity that we see now in this arena. Post-quantum cryptography, which I mentioned, quantum communication utilizing entanglement. So that's again with networks. In simple cases, they'll explain it as if I've got two qubits and I split them up in vast distances, right? And they're entangled. I entangle them first, and I put one here and I put one in China. I should be able to, based on reading the state of one, immediately know the state of the other. They are correlated, right? And it is not your standard correlation where you pass something between them. This is one of those things that is hard to understand, but it is something that does exist and has been proven. And so the idea there is whenever two people are talking, Alice and Bob, you'll hear this a lot, they can basically communicate with each other. And if an eavesdropper comes in and just tries to take a reading, well, guess what? They disturb that state. So that quantum bit is now tainted. And everybody knows. The two parties know on each side, right? And there's no way around it. It's not like something else where somebody can wrap a signal in cybersecurity, put something in front of the message, behind the message, put something within the message, like steganography or something like that. So essentially, when that happens, the two parties just basically drop the keys they were using, regenerate new ones, and they have methods for transferring information back again. So it's something that will happen fairly quickly, instantaneously, once they design these networks. But that is one of the key properties of a quantum state, is that once you read it, it basically decoheres. It becomes zeros and ones again, not this quantum superposition state. So I'll mention there just real quick, QML, that's where the strength is going to be for quantum. So you have a lot of people working on machine learning and AI. Well, what quantum is going to be able to do, and I did a presentation, I'm also a graduate from UTSA, early on that just said, quantum is going to help machine learning, and machine learning is going to help quantum. And there's two ways around that. But the idea there is with that combination, that's where you're going to see a lot of activity in the next few years. But of course, the opposite can happen is you have organizations, North Korea, for example, who can now use some of that same technology and use it against you. So you have to be prepared for that kind of stuff. So some of the basics, I won't go too much into the physics of this, but people say, why is it that having a quantum system can really provide an advantage? And part of the advantage you'll see here, and a lot of times these qubit systems are single photons, a nucleus, an electron. For example, phosphorus, you have spin up, spin down. The idea there, and they're controlled by magnetic fields in some cases. But you'll notice here, if you're typically working on computers, and you get down to the bit level, you'll see how you can represent these four states with 2 bits, as you see here. But you still only have 2 bits of information, right? You still only have the 0 or the 1. That's what you're going to be able to do. Now, a qubit is basically a state, a superposition where your qubit can be in 0 and 1 at the same time. You don't know what it is at that time until you actually read it and measure it, and then it either flips to a 0 or a 1, right? The idea is that while it's in a superposition state, that's when you do your calculation. It can take advantage of all these different probabilities, these states at one time. And then when you're ready and you feel like, okay, now I want to complete my circuit, I'm going to measure it, and whatever zeros or ones come out, that's going to be my solution. It's hard to understand, but part of the advantage here is that you'll notice with 2 qubits, you actually have 4 pieces of information here, because you have a probability that it's in, those 2 qubits are in 0, 0, 0, 1, 1, 0. So you've got a lot more information. These are the probability distributions, and that's sort of the strength. That's where you can actually exponentially increase the amount of states or information that you can hold. And as they mentioned, it's 2 to the n, the number of qubits that are involved. If you have 2 to the 300, I believe it's something like more particles than there are in the universe. And so right there, as you scale up, you can basically manage a lot more information and use those complex states in your calculations. And that's just kind of touching upon where the physics come into play. Again, some basic superposition, as I mentioned, you can have the qubit and 0 and 1 at the same time because you can't measure momentum and position together. That's part of the problem. Entanglement, which I mentioned, is basically having two qubits that are separated by that now, and I'm only talking 2. So if you've got a system that's got 8 qubits, you can entangle all 8 qubits together, and you've got even a more complex state. So they're all your operations should be unitary and should be reversible. That's also another thing that's a property of the quantum physics. No cloning, as I mentioned, you can't copy quantum states. And then they're all probabilistic. So what that means is if you're a quantum developer, normally when you run your circuits, which is your quantum program, you run it 1,000 times, 2,000, 10,000 times, because each time you're going to get a slightly different answer. The hope is that by a distribution, you'll see, okay, yeah, 0, 1, 0, 0, 1, 0 seems to be the one that's always coming out, so that's got to be it. So you're never going to get a perfect answer. It's basically all probabilistic. And if you produce your circuit or program it correctly, it should come out with a fairly good answer almost all the time, but that's not always the case. That's where algorithm design comes in, and that's a hard thing. If you get exposed to the quantum physics related to qubits, you'll see this represented a lot, block sphere. So essentially, this is the way most people represent quantum states, and you'll see any point on this on the surface of this sphere is actually a quantum state, and then most of your quantum algorithms are basically rotating the state. So you have rotations in the X, Y, and Z axis, but then you have things like bit flips, which is essentially a combination of gates, as we call them, that can do other things. Now, this seems foreign, but essentially, this is what's operating behind any algorithm that you're going to write. So quantum computers, there's essentially 2 types: annealing, which are the ones that came out first, D-Wave being probably the biggest company that has annealing, although they have talked about moving into the gate-based systems. And then you have gate-based. So talking a little bit about annealing, I work with a company that does optimization. They work on quadratic and constrained binary optimizations. Now, they solve problems. Their use cases are things like on Shell oil. In San Antonio, I've got 100 Shell gas stations, but I can only put 10 EV chargers across them. How can I best distribute those EV charging stations so that I get the best use out of them? And so you basically, standard optimization problem, you enter in all your parameters. Where do all the people who own these types of vehicles live? And that could be part, of affluence or availability. They're near a Tesla station, etc. And so you type all these things in. These are your hyperparameters or parameters that you're typing into any optimization problem, and they get solved. Other people in the classical world use things like Gurobi Optimizer, which is a tool that, if you look it up, it's essentially can do these types of solutions as well. One of the organizations that I work with, they reached the limitation on Gurobi. So they were trying their application, and Gurobi would just freeze and it would die. But they would flip it over to D-Wave, and D-Wave has a system called Leap, which is a cloud-based quantum computing offering, and they could actually run and get a result. The other use case they would do would be, I have 20 satellites, and I need to capture pictures, based on criteria, high resolution. I have to keep my costs down, or I need them of a certain location. They could type in all the parameters, and it's basically a matrix. If you understand some computation, they submit it to D-Wave, and out comes okay. Based on those 20, here's the 5 that you can probably choose that are best. Those types of optimization problems are very low-hanging fruit for quantum computing. They can also be solved on gate-based computers with some certain algorithms. So if you take some of these problems that you're doing currently in the classical world, you will reach limitations on the amount of data you have and the complexity. In other words, the more parameters, hyperparameters, constraints that you have, things will bog down. What the hope is that quantum computers will help alleviate some of that, where you won't have to limit yourself on what you could do. There's another company I work with, QCI, which also does an entropy type computing based on the icing model, which again is a physics term. Right now we're in what's called noisy intermediate scale computers, which means that most of the computers now they have a lot of noise. They decohere very easily. When you're running your program, you try to run it as quickly and with as few gates as possible because you may not make it to the end. Now imagine you're running that 1,000 times, as I mentioned before. You have some issues. So what people are working on is logical qubits. So what they do is, if you're familiar with error correction, they essentially have one qubit that's made up of one physical qubit and many logical qubits. And what they do is it's like parity checking. They basically check each other. So when that qubit starts drifting or going into an error state, the other qubits around basically are like the support system and say, wait, don't decohere, stay with me. And so what happens is, when you might have thought you needed only 10 physical qubits, you actually need 100, 1,000, etc. Because for each physical qubit, you'll need many other qubits that support it. So that becomes a logical qubit. Errors. I worked on a couple of projects dealing with error correction. So there's error correction, suppression, and mitigation. Error correction happens at the hardware state. So those are the IBMs of the world that are actually trying to make sure that their systems don't go into error. Suppression, those are other things that control mechanisms work on. And then there's also mitigation. So I've worked on some projects using software that essentially tries to keep a qubit from decohering. And that's as simple as the example I always give is that there are some instances where you have a position on a qubit and it starts drifting, just like anything else. It starts losing its. So what happens is you nudge it, right, with a simple operation, something that like the identity operation that just says, "Hey, wake up," and it basically stays. There's also bit flip. Sometimes the state of the qubit will flip the other way, so you flip it back. These are some error mitigation techniques. They're not always perfect, but they sometimes help. And then I mentioned logical and physical qubits modalities. So I'll talk about this very quickly. There's two diagrams here, so they'll show you. The hard thing about this is that people haven't figured out the best way to do this. Everybody will tout that their system is the best, and there's research behind it, research papers. Academia has published. In fact, many of these companies started out as research projects in academia. But you have superconducting qubits, and you have some of the players there: trapped ions, photonics, neutral atoms, silicon spin quantum dots. So these are all companies that you'll probably see out on the in your investment guides, or people that are trying to raise money or that are going through SPACs, etc. Again, you also have one that's not mentioned on that chart, is nitrogen vacancy diamonds. I don't believe anybody's actually produced a machine yet using NV, but they're already using other elements or other materials that are not diamond based. You'll see annealing mentioned, and the others are actually split between the two. Oh, and now you probably heard Microsoft has what are called topological qubits. They also call them topoconducting, etc. So a lot of people say, a million qubits. Oh, come on. They've got maybe 8, I think, that they've strung together. But the thing is Microsoft has a lot of money, right? And they actually talked about these types of qubits many years ago, and then they had to retract some papers because they didn't get the answers that they were looking for, and they were worried that they were going to get, basically laughed at. So they had to basically say, wait, let's go back to the drawing board and make sure we got it right. But they're going to come up right, because these guys have money, right? And if they can't build the technology, they'll buy the technology, right? So that's usually how these types of things happen, even in this arena. Annealers. So I'll just talk real quickly about that. I don't know what we're doing on time.
You got plenty of time.
Yeah. So annealers, basically what it is and D-Wave has a system like this. They have like thousands of qubits that they can actually build in a machine, but they're not the same thing as gate-based. And for a long time, when I would go to these conferences, you had the two teams, and the gate-based guys were like, annealers, ain't nothing, man. They're not real quantum computers. Come on, these guys are joking. They're saying that they can solve problems already, but they're not. They're posers, essentially, is what they would say. But there's some truth in what they can do, and people have actually used them for optimization. So essentially, you create what are called energy states. So at the highest point here, you have high energy, and then you have low energy, right? And essentially, things want to always go to their lowest energy state, their best situation, their best state, right? So what you do is you use electromagnetism to make what you want to be the answer, higher. So it comes up quicker, and then you entangle the qubits. In this case, you see an opposite coupling. You can either say, when this one is 1, I want this one to be 1, or when this one is 1, I want this one to be 0. And so basically what you do is you program the D-Wave computer basically by the use of a matrix, and it sets all the qubits. It entangles them as necessary. It sets up the biases. These are called biases, what you see here. In other words, it's more likely that something will fall in here than here, because this is a lower state, so this is a preferred state. And once you get everything all panned out, you'll see your energy landscape. You hope that maybe your solution will come out here. You read your qubit system, and you'll see 1, 0, 0, 1. But while all this is being done, those qubits are in superposition, and they're basically floating up and down. And you hope to get your answer, but you may not always get your answer. You may end up somewhere over here when you do the readout. You'll get a bunch of zeros and ones. That's the other thing that I failed to mention, is that any quantum computer, even though you have superposition of those qubits, when you read it, when you do your measurement, you end up with zeros and ones. It's not some probable 0 and 1 state. You actually just get a 0 and 1, but you hope that through the computation, the 0 and 1 string that you got is the one that you need. Gate-based circuit model. So if you're familiar again with standard, computer science, everything that you do, even though you program it and you don't care what happens behind the scenes, is all logic, right? There's AND gates, OR gates, all this other basic stuff that occurs. Well, that's the state that we're in on the quantum side. We're just programming them in gate-based languages. So you have all these different gates, and then you have matrices. That's all it really is. Essentially, you have states that are being multiplied by each other, and you have these states that you end up with a lot of matrix multiplication. That's why GPUs, for example, that people use for a lot of AI are also useful for this. There's plenty of people that are doing simulation, which is, I can't get to a quantum computer now, but can I simulate a quantum computer on a classical computer? Yeah, I can use GPUs and TPUs, which are tensor processing units, which is Google is famous for. So those TPUs are all they're really doing is a lot of matrix or tensor multiplication. That's all they're really doing, but they can do it fast, and they're built for that. And so that's the kind of thing that happens behind the scenes. You see these types of operations. For example, these are a few of the gates that you see. So when you're actually programming a computer, you'll see Hadamard gates. Hadamard gates put a qubit in a superposition. And then you have basically rotation, Pauli gates, and they'll tell you in the X or Y, etc. You have control gates. Whatever the state of this one depends on the state of this one. And so that's basically how you do your ANDs and your ORs and your swaps and things like that. So if you take computer science now, I don't even know if they still teach machine language, but when I took it, that's what we had to learn. We had to learn what your what your C++ code actually gets converted to when it's running on the machine. It's not running your C++ code just as is. That's an abstraction, right? So what happens underneath is something way more interesting, but complex. So it's not suitable for all problems. So people say, quantum computers are going to take over classical computing. They're not. They're not universally faster, and they're not a replacement for classical. So you're still going to have your classical computer, and you're probably going to have your quantum computer in the cloud. There's plenty of companies that are working to get QPUs, which are quantum processing units, for example, the Microsoft one, but I think that's going to be a little longer. Essentially, the companies that are already producing GPUs and TPUs, NVIDIA, they're probably the best suited for actually creating a QPU as soon as somebody can wrap one up and put it on a small footprint. They're good for optimization, pathfinding, factory period finding, and QML, quantum machine learning. Every operation is not faster than a classical computer. But the advantage is a reduction of the number of operations to get the same thing done on a classical computer. And the fact that it can hold so many states in those qubits, or that combination of qubits, that's where the power lies, that you can actually hold a lot more information and process a lot more during your computation steps. That's where the benefit comes. There's common algorithms already. Here's one that deals with the simple. These are some of the things that people did initially. It's like, we we can't launch a rocket yet with a quantum computer. So let's make a small algorithm. Let's see if it works. Let's see if we can work through it. And they build upon that. So you have a couple of other ones, quantum Fourier transform. So if you're familiar with Fourier transform, essentially, if you hear sound and it's made up of many sounds, Fourier transform allows you to actually break down that sound into the different pitches and notes or whatever. They have an analog for quantum, or an analogy. QAOA and QSVM, these are machine learning type algorithms. So people are just getting these things done. That's the hard part, is developing an algorithm that does something that is being done on the classical side. That is the hardest thing. That's where sometimes these designers, algorithm designers, are going back to the physicists and asking them, do the math, because it's a big step going from the math to the actual running of the algorithm. But it takes some time, and it takes a lot of teams to sort of work together. Quantum image processing, this is something I've actually done some work in. The reason this was interesting is because the government used to, like, for example, the NGA used to produce all their own imagery. Now they buy it from other companies like Black Sky and who else. But think about all the imagery that is being collected now. Every day, every minute, every second. So the data increases, right? So a lot of the machine learning models can handle a lot of data, but there'll be a point where there's so much data to process and much more resolute data. So you've got more resolution that classical systems are going to not be able to handle these. So that's one thing to keep in mind. Some tools. There's some packages already. So anybody here who already does machine learning, works in Python, either through Google Colab or any of the tools that are available, Anaconda, which is another tool, Visual Studio Code you can use. Essentially, that's what people use to program quantum computers, is they just pull down a library. Most of the time, you're actually using NumPy and a few of these other packages that are being used in standard AI and ML work. And quantum packages are just basically an add-on with some of their own syntax, etc. There's people that are using simulators, right? So that means that, hey, I don't have access to a quantum machine, but there's classical systems using tensor networks that can simulate way more than a classical computer can. But they're still running on a classical computer. They're just using, as we say, I wouldn't say tricks, but they're using certain methods to simulate more qubits than a classical computer could use. GUIs, I mentioned Leap from D-Wave. You can log on, get an account. Classic out of Israel. They've got a real good system. That's a picture of their system here at the top. StrangeWorks out of Austin. I've met this gentleman, Bill Gonzalez. So he's got a system here where you can log in. These two systems here are nice and very similar to Amazon Bracket. Is you can actually choose which hardware you want to use. So you can say, I want to use an IBM system. I want to use an IonQ system. I want to use a Rigetti system. And you pick, which system you need. Now you still have to do some authentication, right? So you pass in your token and it logs you in, and then it runs your program on those machines, and then it returns the output, which is very similar to the way we used to do things. And some of you may not be familiar with this, but when I was at UTSA, I used to have to create basically a punch card with my program on it and submit it at the library. And then they would run the program, and then I would get my results back. And if you screwed up anything, you'd get back up. So you go to lunch, you'd come back, man, I didn't get anything useful. Where did I make a mistake? So you have to submit it again. This is kind of the way this works now, is you basically program your quantum program. You can run it locally on a simulator and say, hey, everything checks out. Now let me run it on a real computer and see what comes out. Qiskit is an IBM software library. Penny Lane by Xanadu is another one. That's very specific to QML. And so that's what these sites also have great tutorials. You don't have to try to figure it out on your own like some of us had to do. You go in there and you'll see, hey, I want to work on quantum chemistry. There's 5 or 6 different algorithms that you can actually choose from and start playing with. CERT from Google, and there's plenty more. I'll just show you a quick example. Here's some quantum image processing that I did. So the hard part about any of this is that you still have to rely on a quantum computer any solution at this point is going to be hybrid, which means you're going to be using a classical computer and a quantum computer together. It's rare that a quantum computer is going to do everything. As I mentioned, they're not interchangeable. So you have to use one and then the other. The issue here, for example, is I'm taking drone imagery, and I'm just trying to find edges. Just a simple algorithm, right? Nothing too fancy. But what I have to do is, because there's not enough qubits to actually process this whole image, I have to chunk it, right? So I have to take this image, and using standard Python, I split it up using standard Python tools, right? Image tools. And then I run my quantum algorithm, my circuit, which does the edge detection on each of the chunks. And then I recombine everything. So, I've talked to a few naysayers who will say, yeah, but you're still then held back by the classical side. If your image is very large, you still got to wait on your classical side. Well, the hope is that at some point we'll speed that process up. The fact that it can be done is very interesting. And the fact that this is one of the initial use cases, in that, could we do something useful that could take the place of a classical computer? Yeah, edge detection. You don't realize it, but every time your Ring camera recognizes your dog instead of someone running, there's edge detection going on. There's all types of other image processing operations that are occurring that you take for granted, right? One of the basic ones is edge detection. So anyway, that was something that I had worked on based on some imagery. Again, quantum machine learning, hybrid's going to be the shortest path. You're going to have circuits, right? When people create quantum circuits that are parameterized. When I first started, you couldn't pass parameters into a quantum system. You had to set everything up, all your numbers, all your values, and then run your program. Now you can actually, because of QML, you can actually say, these are parameters. I'm going to run it through my classical machine learning, and I'm going to feed those back, right? So back propagation, basically you're trying to tune your model and make it much more refined. And so that is something that's more a newer development on the quantum side. And you use classical neural networks. Essentially what happens is your quantum layer becomes a layer. If you're familiar with quantum machine learning, you have many layers, pooling layers, all these other types of layers that do certain things to your data. They find all the features. Well, essentially quantum just becomes another layer in there, but it does provide some advantage. It can find features fairly quickly, and you have what are called quantum kernels. This is just an example from the penny lane side. So you see classical computer here, it does quantum embedder. Basically, you take the data and you turn it into a quantum state, as I mentioned. You do something quantum with it. You measure it, then you cost functions, right? If anybody's familiar with AI ML, they're using cost functions, and you feed back into the parameterized model, and then you just basically keep going until you get a good example. And I've got a couple of examples. I probably won't be able to show them, but the ideas that I'm talking about are actually being done. So that kind of talks about those components that I mentioned there. There's different types of encoding. And then the last one is just basically you pass the inputs, calculate the loss, and then you back propagate. So that's typical ML stuff there. I'm not doing anything strange or talking about anything strange. The only thing that's different is it's got a quantum kernel or a quantum piece to it. Some of the things that people are doing on the machine learning side, classifiers, which are pretty standard. If I've got 1,000 penguins, and they're all different types of penguins, and now I got a new penguin, can I categorize it? Can I classify that penguin based on my model? Can my model say, yeah, that penguin is this type of penguin, or whatever other object you're trying to classify? QSVM, quantum neural networks, quantum convolutional neural networks, right? So that's another type of machine learning algorithm. And as I mentioned, there's several packages out there. PyQML is kind of an interesting one because it already has a lot of stuff. People are also trying to jump to transformers. You've always heard that famous paper, Pay Attention, which talks about the people who developed the transformer model, which runs a lot of the image processing, and then random forest. There's other people that are saying, okay, what can I take on the ML side and make an algorithm that's quantum based that does kind of the same thing, or can it fold into some of these other machine learning algorithms? There's simple classification, a simple use case of linear classification. I won't go through that. It basically just deals with how you walk through just to get classification. But here's something important: you can get more complex feature spaces in higher dimensions, right? So some of the problem is that when you're dealing with kernels, right? Which basically they map your data into higher dimensions. Is sometimes give poor results, or the data becomes too complex, or it takes too long. Part of the projects that we did at UTSA was we built a sentiment analysis tool, right? That would try to determine whether a posting, social media posting was cyberbullying, and then which type, gender, race-based bullying, these other types. And all we did was create a web crawler, suck all, whatever number of feeds that we wanted. And then we built the model. And basically you turned it on and you let it run 2 or 3 days. Plenty of times we run it on our machine and it would crap out, because that's how much data it was processing and what it was doing. And that was just a simple case. So the idea here is you've got companies that are using entire data centers to train their models. These large companies, that's what they're doing. But even then, they'll come to a limit at some point, unless computing power keeps increasing. But there's some things that can be done on the quantum side. Some models can be trained with less data. That's important, right? So I don't got to wait for all this data. Some models can work on generated data. I don't know if people know that sometimes you don't have enough data to train your model. So you use systems that generate data, fake data essentially, but it's data that's similar, and you use that to train your model. Well, with quantum, you can sometimes get away with using less. That's theoretical, but those are some things that we're looking at. And then there's also some things that are being worked on regarding structured data and kernel alignment. Those are just, again, machine learning concepts. So I'm nearing the end here. If you're interested in getting an education, I've been, praying that UTSA picks up something along this line. Not yet. They have one course at the PhD level on QML, but there's plenty of teachers around. I've talked to several of them, and they're doing some projects on quantum side. So maybe you're smart enough, some of them will, you'll impress one of them to let you work on their projects. There is a gentleman out of UT Austin, Dr. Scott Aronson, very well known. When I went to the first conferences, he would actually get sat up on the stage and you could ask him anything about quantum. That was the big thing about those conferences. He wrote one of the defining books on quantum information science. I've talked to him a few times, sharp guy. He teaches a couple of courses at UT Austin on quantum, a graduate and an undergraduate. But they've got a big support system over there. Caltech, MIT, Stanford, of course, Harvard, University of Chicago, as I mentioned. So if not, again, self-educate. Q World out of Latvia, silver and bronze are some of the intro courses that they have. Clusters here in the States, you've got Chicago Quantum Exchange. I know plenty of people within that organization, Potomac Quantum, all these other ones. Most of there's AFRL, they've got a special quantum group. I've actually gone to Rome, New York to see some of the work they're doing with IonQ, dealing with drone-to-drone communication using quantum systems, which is kind of interesting. Normally when you go in there, they'll either, you can tour today or you can't tour today. But it's interesting. That's where some of the progress is being made. Now, you also have all the national labs. I've gone to Argonne Lab and seen their quantum setup. They've got a lot of small startups dealing with quantum memory, which is kind of interesting. They're all basically out of research projects. I mean, essentially, they're working in academia. I had a teacher, I talked to UTSA not too long ago, who's now with the university in New York, said, people in this part of the country, they go to college and they get their 4-year degree, and then they're out. They want to get that job. People in these other institutions, these larger ones, they got the 10-year degree plan. Why? Because they're staying in there to continue the research and make and build the teams and come up with a company. Not only do they get their degree, they took longer, but hopefully they've got something that they can say, hey, we founded this company based on research that we did at Harvard, at Stanford, at MIT. So you've also got a lot of startups that are dealing with this kind of stuff. So I've talked to a few of the companies that are going through some of these programs. And the nice thing about them is that they'll introduce you to other people. They'll introduce you to people that are higher up in the chain and that might be interested in what you're doing. But you do have a lot, and I'm not saying they're selling crystals, but you have a lot of startups. Just like with any industry, they don't have anything. they were just saying that we're doing this and we're doing that. And then so normally what they'll ask me, and I've had a few investment companies ask me as well, hey, can you evaluate this particular company, look at their papers that they come out and see if they're of any value. Is it real? Is it not real? And so I'll call, ask questions, and try to get the lowdown and see, yeah, this is legit or no. Don't even consider them. But that's part of some of what I do on the side. Workforce. So if you're interested in this arena, pretty much anyone who's working in almost any field that has some technical experience could fold over into quantum side. Quantum programmers, researchers, scientists, teaching. There's plenty of people who just do teaching. They teach quantum courses, defense, of course. Anywhere AI is, you're probably going to have quantum optimization, material science, finance, medicine, energy, DevOps. So part of what we do as Webhead for the NGA, for example, is we do the DevOps chain, which is basically anything from Kubernetes, setting up Docker's containers, pushing them up into secure environments, et cetera, things like that. Well, there's people who are now working only on the quantum side. PyQML is one good example. You can actually go to their site and download a container that's got everything that you need to start programming the quantum, and then you can duplicate and replicate that across any environment that you need. Security is a big thing, so there's a lot of people that are saying, yeah, you know, I'm building these quantum programs, but you know, the worry is that somebody comes in and hacks my system, and all of a sudden now they've got my quantum program. You know, there's always risk in that when you're pushing your solution to the cloud, because, for example, when you published IBM, I mean, now they have record of what you're building, and they could say, hey. Anyway, those are some of the key areas I think that people are really looking towards to get some of these quantum solutions in play. That I think concludes everything I had to say, at least in regards to this. So I want to thank Zach, Jesse with DevSA, ACM, TechBlock, from what I understand, sponsors, all the Webhead people that are out here. I know a lot of it gets deep. I was hoping not to get too deep, but the idea was just to give you a general exposure. And if you're interested, please just ask me any questions. I mean, I read research papers all day, pretty much, aside from doing my general work, which is working on software development. I love to just find out about what's going on in this arena, and you know, hope that I can be a part of what's going to go forward. And anyone else who wants to join, I mean, just you know, send me an email, and maybe I can help. Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.
Would you consider yourself an annealer or a gate guy?
Well, the funny thing is I mainly work in the engaged world, but I have helped companies on the annealing side. So they'll ask me, hey, can you just look at our algorithm or what we're writing and just give us a rundown? And I don't know exactly what it is they're doing, but a lot of times I'll point some things out and say, yeah, this is why you're having this particular issue. That comes from a computer science background. That's a problem solving. I say, oh yeah, you got some. And some of the other times this is one thing that I spend a lot of time doing with Qiskit, for example, that I use a lot of, is that they change their APIs so often that my program that I wrote, you know, 6 months ago stops working. I'm like, what the heck? So I go in there and they changed, you know, the calls. Now I got to go back and figure it out. And you'll hear a lot of people complain like, man, I had all this work and now I got to, and they won't always know because it took them so long just to write the program that they're not computer science. They don't have a computer science background. They don't understand what it is to modify the calls or the parameters that are being passed. So that's the struggle. That's a big struggle, is just that and setting up environments. So most of the time when I'm setting up quantum programs, I'm using Python environments to create and isolate. So I'm using Qiskit version X, Qiskit version Y, etc. And I try to get them all running together on the same machine, which is sometimes difficult. But anyway, that's a good question. Yeah.
And we're available in the space till 9 o'clock or later. So feel free to however long you stay around. Ask questions. So. Yeah. But we'll wrap it up on our side, so we can, if you are trying to go home, I know it's getting late, or ask Bill questions. But once again, another round of applause. Super excited to have that been our first conversation this year, and I'm glad I can tell I've enjoyed pizza too much. Cheese is already out. But we'll move on from there. Something I always like to highlight at our events is other events coming up. There's so much going on in the community. If you don't already follow it, Luma and Meetup are the places to check it out. We have 2 upcoming events, and that is our Unreal Engine workshop. That is actually a paid event. So if you're looking for a full day workshop that's from 9 to 4, 9 a.m. to 4 p.m., we will be down at Techport SA. We have an instructor, his name is Marco Torres, and he's going to teach anything and everything about Unreal Engine for past beginner, but a bit more intermediate. And then we also have a series starting with our co-chair back there, Gene. He's going to go over advanced JavaScript practices and some other things, and maybe the temporal stuff, but I just didn't know because I want to hear about it. But that's further discussed. Other things happening in the community. Coming up actually tomorrow is the .NET user group. That's live virtually at 12 on Zoom. And then we also have the DEF CON meetup. If you haven't heard of DEF CON and you like cybersecurity, they meet up over in not too far from here, but the university pretty close to here. And as well, another shout out for the book clubs and stuff happening. That's happening this Saturday, as well as the Geeks and Drinks event happening next week. So that's not all the events. Definitely check out the calendar. These are just some of the ones I'm highlighting that are coming up pretty soon. But a big thank you to our partners. Places like this Project Cowork and things from TechBlog aren't possible without them. They help fund some of this. So super appreciative of them and helping them lend our space. So thank you for that. Exclusive to y'all. I know this is kind of abrupt and I just kind of hit onto this just a minute ago. Hey, I'll figure it out for you. I'll bring it. All right. But the what I want to offer, and especially since I can't give so much the first year, maybe even the second year, I want to offer a first membership discount to y'all. So if you're interested in just supporting the org, or getting access to ACM in general at a national level, this will get you your ticket. This will take 50% off our $50 subscription right now. If you have any questions, totally let us know. All these QR codes that I'm about to show you will be available at the last slide, so I'll leave that up. So if you don't get it right now, totally doable. I just mentioned our Unreal Engine workshop. That is also a cost and pay for thing. That's another thing that helps fund us for the year. I'm offering another discount for our QC10. I figured Code Quantum. I say Code Quantum. Quantum computing is a good term here. So QC10. If you're interested in that for yourself. As always, events like this aren't possible without people giving feedback or just generalities and wanting to share more about what they want to learn. So definitely fill out this feedback form for us. It's just a general, how do you like the venue? How do you like me? How do you like Bill? How do you like the topic? Or we want to hear something else in the future? So scan that if you want to do that. And then that was it. So I appreciate you all for coming out. I'm excited for the turnout for our first meeting for the year, looking for more. I've already mentioned to Bill and his team at WebHead that if y'all really like this stuff, we're totally down to keep putting things like this on. So no social pressure, but excited for the group and turnout. As if you didn't know already, I saw some people taking screenshots and pictures. We do record this live. I'm live right now. We're on YouTube. So if there's something that you missed, is there something that you wanted to catch back up on, or you just want to hear Bill's presentation all over again, or maybe twice, you can go view it on our YouTube channel at ACM San Antonio. And I'll leave it at that. I'm Zachariah Holland, Gene, Mark Robinson. Appreciate it for y'all showing up, and look forward to seeing you later. Thank you. Good, dismissed. I don't know what to say. Thank you, guys.
I give you those forms that you talked about.
Yes, I did.
You know what good is, yeah, so what you're reading, see and where so.
I don't know why.